The clock on the mantel ticked with ruthless precision, each second dragging Leo deeper into the abyss of his thoughts. He sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows digging into his knees, staring blankly at the crumpled newspaper discarded on the coffee table. The once familiar comfort of his home now felt alien, the warmth leached away by the growing chasm between him and Elizabeth. Her footsteps broke his trance, sharp, deliberate, as they echoed from the hallway. He glanced up, catching a glimpse of her reflection in the glass cabinet. She stood in front of the mirror, applying a final coat of deep crimson lipstick. The confidence in her eyes was something Leo hadn't seen directed at him in years. "I'm heading out," Liz announced, her tone casual, as if she were simply commenting on the weather. She adjusted the strap of her sleek black dress, the fabric clinging to her figure in a way that made Leo's stomach churn. He cleared his throat, his voice thick with suspicion. "With friends again?" She didn't turn to face him, her attention fixed on her reflection. "Yes. With friends," she replied, almost dismissively. Her voice carried an undertone of impatience, as if his question was nothing but an unnecessary disturbance. Leo leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving her. "Friends," he echoed, the word leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "By friends, you mean him, don't you?" Liz froze, just for a fraction of a second. A tiny hesitation. Almost imperceptible. But Leo caught it. She quickly recovered, spraying a delicate mist of floral perfume around her before finally turning to face him. "So what if I am?" she challenged, her eyes narrowing. "What are you going to do about it, Leo? Throw another tantrum? It's just one night." His fingers curled into fists, veins taut against his skin. "One night? You think this is about one night, Liz? You've been doing this for months." His voice cracked, anger and desperation intertwining. "Do you think I don't know about Vince?" Liz rolled her eyes, exasperation flickering across her face. "I don't have time for this," she snapped, grabbing her purse from the side table. You've become exhausting, Leo. Always prying. Always accusing. No wonder she stopped herself, but it was too late. "No wonder you what?" Leo pressed, rising to his feet. His towering frame filled the space between them. But Liz didn't flinch. "Forget it," she said coldly, her heels clicking against the floor as she moved toward the door. "Elizabeth, we need to talk about this." Leo blocked her path, his voice firm but pleading. "You can't keep walking out and pretending this is normal. You can't what?" She cut him off, her voice sharp. "Can't live my life? Can't have a single moment to myself without you breathing down my neck?" Leo's jaw tightened, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You think this is living your life? Sneaking around? Lying to my face? Throwing away everything we've built for some cheap thrill with your boss?" Liz's eyes darkened with anger. "Oh, please," she spat. "Don't act like this marriage was some kind of fairy tale. You think I'm the only one who's been pretending?" Her words hit him like a slap. For a moment, he was silent, the weight of her accusation sinking in. Liz took advantage of his hesitation, slipping past him and out the door without another word. The door slammed shut, leaving Leo standing motionless in the middle of the room, his hands trembling. The walls seemed to close in around him, the silence deafening. Hours passed, but Leo remained frozen in place, his thoughts spiraling out of control. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, a stark contrast to the chaos inside his mind. He glanced at his phone, the temptation to call Liz almost overwhelming. But what would he say? Beg her to come home? Confront her with the truth he already knew? Instead, he opened a hidden folder on his phone, the one labeled Evidence. His thumb hovered over the screen before he tapped it, revealing weeks' worth of photos, text messages, and screenshots. Each image, each word, was a dagger to his heart. He had discovered her affair with Vince months ago. But he had clung to the hope that she would end it. That she would choose him. Tonight had shattered that illusion. His hands shook as he scrolled through the messages, his vision blurring with unshed tears. The words blurred together, but the meaning was clear. Liz had moved on. And he? He was nothing but a shadow in her rearview mirror. The phone slipped from his grasp, landing with a soft thud on the carpet. Leo leaned back, his head resting against the couch. His breathing was shallow. His mind raced with thoughts he dared not voice. But one thought stood out among the chaos, dark and unrelenting. If Liz wanted to burn down their life together, he would make sure she understood the consequences. Leo stared at the ceiling, the ticking of the clock slicing through the quiet of the house. Time felt both frozen and relentless. Mocking him with every second that passed. The weight of Liz's betrayal pressed heavily on his chest, a suffocating reminder of how far things had unraveled. His mind churned with the remnants of their argument, every word she had hurled at him replaying like a broken record. He pushed himself up from the couch, his movements slow, deliberate. Crossing to the window, he peered through the curtains, scanning the empty street below. The night had grown colder, frost creeping over the pavement. Somewhere out there, Liz was laughing. Drinking. Basking in her escape. While he stood here. Drowning in the wreckage she left behind. His gaze shifted to the coffee table, where his phone lay face down next to the newspaper. The word evidence burned in his mind like a brand. Leo clenched his fists, his entire body trembling with suppressed rage. It wasn't just anger fueling him now. It was something sharper. Purpose. He wasn't a man prone to violence. Or impulsivity. But weeks of torment, *** of sleepless nights, of gut-wrenching doubt, *** had worn him down to the bone. Liz thought she could destroy their life and walk away untouched. She was wrong. Liz clinked her glass against Vince's, her laughter cutting through the hum of conversation and music that filled the upscale lounge. Vince leaned closer, his hand resting lightly on her knee, a confident smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You look stunning tonight," he said, his voice low, intimate. Liz's lips curved into a smile, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "You're not too bad yourself," she teased. The thrill of being with Vince, of shedding the mundane monotony of her life with Leo, was intoxicating. Here, she was the woman she had always wanted to be. Desired. Admired. Alive. "You deserve more than him, you know," Vince murmured, his fingers grazing her wrist. "I could give you so much more." Liz hesitated, just for a moment. A flicker of doubt. But she shoved it aside. "Let's not talk about him," she said, her voice clipped. "Tonight's about us." Leo paced the living room, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. His mind was a storm, thoughts colliding, ricocheting off one another as he tried to make sense of his next move. He had spent months piecing together Liz's deception. Each discovery had cut deeper than the last. He remembered the night he first saw the texts. How his heart had stopped. How the world had tilted. At first, he had told himself it was a misunderstanding. A mistake. But the evidence had piled up, too high, too damning to ignore. Tonight, something inside him had snapped. The thought of Liz with Vince, ***, laughing, touching, wanting, ***, was unbearable. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, reopening the folder. The pictures. The texts. The videos. They were all there. Staring back at him. Ghosts of a life he no longer recognized. "No more," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "No more lies. No more pretending." Leo didn't fully understand what he was planning. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let this continue. He wouldn't let Liz tear him apart. If she wanted a new life, she would have to face the consequences of destroying the one they had built. She leaned into Vince, her head resting on his shoulder. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Their brilliance was a stark contrast to the darkness creeping into her thoughts. "This feels right," she murmured, her fingers tracing patterns on Vince's sleeve. Vince smiled, his hand resting on hers. "It's because it is. You deserve this, Liz. You deserve to be happy." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, pushing away the guilt that occasionally nipped at the edges of her mind. She didn't want to think about Leo. Or the hurt she was causing. Tonight wasn't about regret. It was about freedom. The cab pulled up in front of Vince's high-rise apartment. Its sleek, modern facade glowed softly in the night. Liz stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement as Vince guided her toward the entrance. Back at the house, Leo stood at the window. His silhouette barely visible against the darkened room. He had been standing there for hours. Waiting. Watching. The street remained empty, save for the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. His thoughts had settled into a strange clarity. A cold, steady determination. He turned away from the window. His eyes landed on the stack of papers he had left on the kitchen counter. Among them was their marriage certificate. Its pristine edges mocked him. He grabbed it, his fingers curling tightly around the fragile paper. With a sharp pull, he tore it in two. The sound was loud, jarring in the quiet house. He tore it again. And again. Until the pieces lay scattered across the counter like remnants of his trust. His jaw clenched. He moved toward the living room, retrieving a black duffel bag from the hall closet. He placed it on the coffee table. And began to pack. Liz stirred on Vince's couch, the warmth of the alcohol settling into her limbs. The room spun slightly as she tried to collect her thoughts. Vince, standing in the open-plan kitchen, poured another glass of wine, his movements slow and confident. "I should probably go," Liz murmured, though her body betrayed her words, sinking deeper into the plush cushions. Vince smirked, setting the glass down and making his way toward her. "Go? And leave me here all alone? That doesn't sound like you." Liz let out a soft chuckle despite herself. The warmth of his presence chased away her guilt. She allowed herself to relax. To forget. Meanwhile, across town, Leo zipped the duffel bag closed. His hands were steady. His face was unreadable. He set the bag by the door, his mind racing through the possibilities of what lay ahead. He paced the living room like a predator in a cage, his mind no longer clouded by hesitation. Every shred of restraint had crumbled. He glanced at the duffel bag by the door, then at the clock. She wasn't coming home anytime soon. Leo grabbed his phone, scrolling through the messages and the evidence folder one last time. The anger burning in his chest wasn't the fiery rage from before. It was cold. Calculated. Lethal. His hand hovered over Vince's address, which he had found a week ago. He hadn't planned to use it. Until now. Leo snatched up his car keys and stepped out into the frigid night air. The cold bit into his skin, but he welcomed it. Letting the sharpness clear his mind. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. This was months of pain and humiliation boiling over. She glanced at it briefly. Leo. Her stomach twisted. Vince noticed. "Everything okay?" She forced a smile, locking the screen. "Yeah," she lied. "Just him." Vince scoffed, picking up his wine. "You don't owe him anything, Liz." "Don't I?" Liz shoved the thought aside and took another sip. Tonight wasn't about Leo. Tonight was about her. Leo's car idled a block away from Vince's building, its engine a low growl beneath him. He had parked far enough to avoid notice but close enough to watch the entrance. And then, there she was. Liz. She glowed beneath the soft streetlights, her laughter cutting through the quiet as she walked hand in hand with Vince. Leo's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He had known. But knowing was different from seeing. The way she looked at Vince. The way she touched him. Like Leo had never existed. As they disappeared into the building, Leo's thoughts sharpened. He couldn't just sit here. Not anymore. Leo stepped out of the car, his breath visible in the cold air. He slung the duffel bag over his shoulder and walked toward the entrance, his face eerily calm. At the doors, he waited. A resident swiped their keycard. Leo slipped in behind them. The elevator hummed softly as it carried him upward. Vince's floor wasn't far. But every second felt like an eternity. The doors slid open. Leo stepped out. Silent. Controlled. He approached Vince's door. His hand hesitated, just for a moment. Then he knocked. The sound echoed faintly in the hallway. A few seconds later, the door opened. Vince stood there. His expression shifted from confusion to guarded suspicion. "Can I help you?" Vince asked, his voice polite but tense. Leo's gaze was cold. "You can." Before Vince could react, Leo shoved the door open, stepping inside. Liz emerged from the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand. The moment her eyes landed on Leo, the color drained from her face. "Leo?" she whispered, barely above a breath. Vince glanced between them, confused. "You know this guy?" Leo didn't look at him. His gaze was locked on Liz. "Oh, she knows me." His voice was eerily calm. "Don't you, Liz?" She swallowed hard. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice rising. She set the glass down, her hands trembling. "I think you already know the answer to that," Leo replied. Vince stepped forward, positioning himself between them. "I think you need to leave," he said, firm. Leo smirked. "You don't get to tell me what to do." And then, the room erupted into chaos. Leo lunged at Vince, his fist connecting hard with the man's jaw. Vince staggered back, crashing into the coffee table as Liz screamed. "Leo, stop," she sobbed. But Leo wasn't listening. Months of rage, betrayal, and torment poured out of him as he grabbed Vince by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "Was it worth it?" Leo growled, his voice low, venomous. "Was ruining my life worth it?" Vince struggled, clawing at Leo's grip. "You're crazy," Vince gasped. Leo let out a humorless laugh. "You haven't seen crazy yet." Liz rushed forward, grabbing Leo's arm, trying to pull him away. "Stop it. You're going to kill him." Leo shoved her back, sending her stumbling. "Stay out of this, Liz." His voice was calm. Deadly. Vince took advantage of the distraction, throwing a desperate punch. It caught Leo off guard. The two men tumbled to the floor, fists flying, blood smearing across the hardwood. Finally, Vince broke free, his face bloodied, his breath ragged. He staggered toward the door, Liz clinging to his arm. "Let's go!" Vince yelled, yanking Liz into the hallway. Leo rose slowly, wiping blood from his split lip. He stepped into the doorway, watching as they ran for the elevator. "This isn't over," Leo muttered. His voice was steady. "Certain." He grabbed the duffel bag from the floor and stepped into the hallway. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The elevator doors slid shut just as Leo reached the end of the hall. His chest heaved, his pulse pounding in his ears as he watched the glowing numbers above the doors descend, floor by floor. He turned sharply. The stairwell. His footsteps echoed against the concrete walls as he took the stairs two at a time, his adrenaline sharpening with each step. Below, Liz clung to Vince, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "We have to call the police," she gasped, glancing over her shoulder as though Leo might appear at any second. Vince shook his head, his jaw clenched. "Not yet. Let's just get out of here first." His face was pale, the swelling on his cheek already darkening. The elevator doors slid open into the lobby. They bolted toward the exit, their movements frantic, unsteady. Leo burst into the lobby seconds later. His eyes scanned the empty space. Then, a sound. A car engine roaring to life outside. Leo pushed through the front doors, stepping into the cold night air just in time to see Vince's sleek black car peeling out of the parking lot. His own car sat idling down the block, exactly where he had left it. Leo jogged toward it. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the door. The engine roared. The tires screeched against the pavement. The chase was on. His knuckles white. The car sped through the city streets, weaving between late-night traffic. Liz sat rigid in the passenger seat. Her phone was clutched so tightly in her hand that her fingers ached. "Vince, we need to go to the police," she urged, her voice breaking. "Not yet," Vince snapped, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "I need to lose him first." The city blurred past them, traffic lights flashed red, but Vince didn't stop. Liz twisted in her seat. Her stomach sank. Leo's car was gaining on them. "He's not stopping, Vince. He's not going to stop." "I've got this," Vince muttered. But his voice lacked conviction. The city streets faded into the outskirts, buildings giving way to dark stretches of highway. Leo's car loomed closer. His headlights cast eerie shadows across the pavement. Vince gritted his teeth and swerved into a side road, trying to throw Leo off. The tires screeched, fishtailing. Liz gasped, clutching the dashboard. Vince jerked the wheel, steadying the car. Leo followed. His movements were precise. Unrelenting. The road narrowed. Thick trees flanked either side. The headlights flickered through the branches, creating long, twisting shadows that danced across the asphalt. Vince pushed the car to its limits. But Leo was closer now. Too close. Then, impact. Leo's car slammed into the rear bumper, jarring them forward. Liz screamed. "Damn it!" Vince shouted, fighting to keep control. Leo hit them again, harder. The car skidded violently. The edge of the road loomed, a steep drop beyond it. The final impact was devastating. Vince's car spun out of control, tires screeching. They veered off the road, crashing into the trees. The sound of metal crunching echoed into the night. Smoke billowed from the crushed hood. The horn blared, stuck in an endless wail. Leo pulled over just a few yards away. His breath came in uneven bursts. He sat there for a moment, staring at the wreckage ahead. His headlights illuminated the twisted metal, the shattered glass. Slowly, he stepped out of his car. His boots crunched against the gravel as he walked forward. Liz coughed, choking on the smoke. Her hands fumbled with the seatbelt. Her head throbbed. The world tilted. She turned to Vince. He was slumped forward against the steering wheel. Blood trickled from his forehead. "Vince?" No response. Liz pushed the door open, stumbling out. Her knees buckled. Then she looked up. And froze. Leo stood just a few feet away. His expression unreadable. "You," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "What have you done?" Leo tilted his head slightly. His gaze was cold. "I told you." His voice was quiet. Deadly. There would be consequences. Liz scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the rough dirt. "Please, Leo," she whispered. "You don't have to do this." He crouched down, locking his eyes onto hers. "Do you think this is about what I have to do?" he murmured. "This is about what you did. What you destroyed." Behind him, Vince groaned. Leo's attention flicked toward the wreckage. Vince stirred. His fingers twitched. His head lifted slightly. Leo's jaw tightened. "Stay down, Vince." His voice was low, firm. Vince ignored him, pushing the door open. He staggered, swaying. His breath was ragged. "This isn't going to end the way you think," Vince rasped. Leo took one step forward. His hand slipped into his jacket pocket. "No," his voice was calm. "Final. It's going to end exactly the way it's supposed to." Liz screamed. Leo lunged. The tension snapped like a live wire. The struggle was violent. Chaotic. All three of them grappled in the darkness of the trees. Vince fought desperately, his movements sluggish from the crash. But Leo's rage was unstoppable. Liz's mind raced. She saw it then, a heavy branch lying in the dirt. Her fingers closed around it. Her hands trembled. With a cry of desperation, she swung. The wood slammed against Leo's shoulder. He stumbled, his grip on Vince loosening. Vince broke free, coughing, gasping. Leo turned to face Liz. His expression darkened. "You really think that's going to stop me?" he snarled. Vince took the opportunity. He lunged from behind, tackling Leo to the ground. Fists flew. The fight was brutal. Merciless. Liz watched, frozen. She knew. This had gone too far. There was no turning back now. Vince delivered the final blow. His fists dripping with blood. Leo lay motionless. His chest rose and fell, shallow. Unsteady. Liz fell to her knees, shaking. "What have we done?" she whispered. Vince didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the dark horizon. The distant wail of sirens broke through the eerie silence. Liz sat frozen on the cold ground, her breath coming in short, shaky gasps. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest, suffocating. Leo lay motionless, his body sprawled in the dirt. Vince staggered back, his fists still clenched, blood smeared across his knuckles. His breathing was ragged, his face pale. Liz turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. What do we do?" Vince wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his jaw tightening. "We need to go." Liz shook her head, her pulse racing. "No. We can't just." The flashing red and blue lights appeared in the distance, reflecting off the trees. Vince grabbed her arm. "We don't have time to talk about this, Liz. We need to leave. Now." Her entire body was shaking. "No. We have to tell them the truth." Vince's expression darkened. "The truth?" He let out a hollow laugh. "The truth is that we just beat a man unconscious in the middle of the woods. The truth is that you hit him with a weapon. You think the cops are gonna see this as self-defense?" Liz's stomach twisted. She looked down at Leo. At the man she had once loved. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, his chest rising and falling unsteadily. He was still alive. For now. Vince grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. "Liz. Look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "We go now, or we go in cuffs. Your choice." Liz felt her heartbeat hammering in her ears. She took a shaky breath. And then, she made her choice. Leo's eyes fluttered open. Pain. A deep, Pulsing pain radiated through his body. The night sky above him blurred, spun. For a moment, he had no idea where he was. Then it hit him. The fight. The crash. Liz. Vince. He gritted his teeth, trying to push himself up. They were gone. The sound of sirens grew louder, flashing lights filling the trees. No. No. Not like this. Not helpless. Not on the ground like a beaten man. With a groan, he forced himself onto his hands and knees. His vision blurred, but his mind was clear. They ran. They thought this was over. But it wasn't. Not even close. Leo let out a slow, pained breath. Then, he smiled. It was weak. But it was still a smile. The game wasn't over. Not yet. Liz sat in the dimly lit apartment, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her phone. Her heart stopped when she saw it. A text. From an unknown number. Her breath hitched as she clicked it open. You really thought you could run? A single photo was attached. A picture of her and Vince. From that night. Taken from the woods. From the shadows. Watching. Waiting. Liz's pulse pounded. Her mouth went dry. A new message appeared. This isn't over, Liz. Not even close. Her hands shook violently. And then, her screen went black.